Howdy goons, I have quite a few handhelds for retro emulation. A 28XX, 35XX, Retro Pocket, a Pocket Go back in the day when those were still popular and new, and now an RG Cube XX. So I have quite a few, and there are so many more out there. So I could recommend you some pretty easily, but instead, I'm going to teach you how you can go about finding the right one for you. Here's my handy dandy super scientific checklist for things to look out for when buying your first retro handheld, and for the many that you'll buy after this, because no one in this hobby buys just one. What do you want to play? This is the biggest factor in your first purchase. Since the games you want to play are going to dictate how much power you'll need, this as consequence will dictate the majority of the handheld, like size, aspect ratio, screen size, buttons, D-pad location, size of buttons, price, and more. Everything hinges on this first decision. For example, if you want to play GameCube, your device is going to cost at least $130 for partial playability, up to $200 for full playability or close to full playability. Now, if you want just PSP and earlier, the $100 mark is a little closer. GBA, well, emulation for that was nailed decades ago, and portable shortly after. So you could get an emulator for as cheap as $30 if you wanted to get the RG28XX and size isn't an issue for you. For double of that, you can get an emulator handheld that plays PS1 and some PSP games. Make sure to check out awesome channels like Techdweeb, Retrogamecorps, Wulff Den, and stuff like that. All of those channels tend to talk a lot about those handhelds, but Retrogamecorps goes super deep in detail and shows gameplay from specific systems that you might also be curious about. If you're more on the entertainment side, then Techdweeb is a really interesting one, and if you're more interested in the technical side of stuff, Bob's Wulff Den is a great one to go with. They're all pretty useful in their own way. Also, keep an eye out for compatibility lists. These are usually on Reddit, and they're a list of games that users put together. Make sure that the games you want to play are playable, and keep in mind other people's definition of playable might be a little different than yours. If the device is for a kid, they probably won't care too much if they're dropping frames. I didn't care about that stuff when I was a kid. Here's an example from my personal device needs. I have a gaming PC. It can run pretty much anything at 60 FPS. I live in a small town with nothing to do, so I don't find myself needing to play anything from GameCube onwards. I can do that on my PC. So I'd really want something to play PSP and systems with lower power. So pretty much any budget Anbernic device would work for me. Do you need a retro handheld? You might assume that someone would have asked themselves this already, but there are a lot of you out there who have access to devices that can be hacked or have access to ROMs given the correct tinkering. If you have a great phone, you might be able to emulate GameCube already and not know it. In that case, you might only need a good controller that has a foam grip in it. If you have a working cartridge-based handheld, you can get a flash cart and play ROMs on it too. For example, if you want to play more GBA and you have a GBA already, then just buy a flash cart with a removable SD card. It'll be cheaper than most handhelds. If you have a home console like a Wii or Wii U already, these are incredibly easy to hack given you have the correct memory units. Some of these memory units you might already have in your home. Some hacks, though, require a flash drive, and others require original SD cards, flat-out SD, which can be hard to find. Then you might want a hard drive to put the games on after, which means around $50 to $80. PS2s can also be hacked with a special memory card nowadays and run games from it. Just saying, there might not be a point to you even buying a retro handheld in the first place because you already have hackable devices in your home. Sometimes the originals are better for emulating because they're made for those games. Like the best DS and 3DS emulator you're going to find on the market is going to be a 3DS that's been hacked. Seriously, why spend hundreds on a device when you can still find a 3DS for less than that? You might even have one in your closet somewhere. Same goes for PSP and Vita. Just hack your Vita. It's cheaper than buying a retro handheld. You can also just hack your PSP. PSPs are like the most hackable system out there. You can put Game Boy Advance on them and stuff like that too. The only thing the retro handheld can do that these devices can't is stuff like Retro Achievements, Moonlight, Portmaster, Pico 8, and Android or Windows operating systems. If you don't care about any of those features and you have a functioning 3DS, you may as well just stick with your 3DS. Screen. The screen is a pretty big factor, and for the most part, this will depend on what the system is expected to be able to play. For example, the Retro Pocket 3 Plus is expected to play most of the PSP library, and that's why it's got a 16:9 screen. But this also means that anything that isn't 16:9 is going to have big borders on the side, and the more vertical the screen ratio for a specific emulated game is, the bigger those borders will be on the widescreen device. The screen size will also influence how portable or pocketable the device is. If you're not playing PS2 PS2 and onwards, or a lot of PSP, you honestly don't need a 16:9 screen. On the other side of the coin, if you're wanting to play a lot of PS2 or even Android games, you're going to want a 16:9 screen, and in that case, Retroid systems are perfect for you. But an RG Cube would be a bad fit for you because it's 1:1 screen ratio, even though it's an Android device. Keep in mind which systems you'll be playing the most. GBA, for example, is a 3:2 ratio. Genesis is a 4:3. Game Boy and Game Boy Color are 1:1, essentially. It's more like 10:9. NES and SNES are weird. Their ratios aren't 4:3, but when you were a kid, you probably played them in 4:3 because of your TV settings. A good rule of thumb is whatever system you want to play, buy the handheld that looks like it. It's a good rule for Anbernic at least, since they have a shape for everything. The RG34XX, aka the one that looks like a Game Boy Advance, the 34XX SP, aka the one that looks like a GBA SP, those are great for the GBA. RG Cube XX looks like an alien gaming system, but it's great for GB, GBC, NES, SNES, and Pico 8 since they're all 1:1 or close to it. I'll have a much more in-detail video about screen ratios soon. How important is the out-of-box experience for you? What I mean by this is, do you want to be able to open up the box and start playing immediately, or are you fine with messing with some stuff? Anbernic devices, for the most part, have a pretty good out-of-box experience, but you will have to do some work no matter what you get. I know some of you want to be able to buy a device preloaded with games and get to playing immediately, but as someone who has some experience with this stuff, that's a pretty terrible idea. I don't think you really understand what you're asking for when you say you want a device that comes with games on it. These devices come from China, and that's their main user base, Chinese people. They buy more of these than we do. The ones preloaded with ROMs are preloaded with primarily Chinese text. Then they're often numbered instead of in alphabetical order, so good luck finding your specific game. Sometimes they have a bunch of duplicates or bad ROMs or crappy ROM hacks, or games you just would never play. There are good ROM hacks, but they're just not using them. Then there's the whole legal issue. If anything kills retro handhelds, it's probably going to be them coming loaded with Nintendo games. It's really easy to find ROMs, and I can't legally tell you how, but you could probably just Google it. Just build your own ROMs list. It'll give you something to do while you wait for it to arrive. The real long part of the setup time is Linux versus Android versus Windows. Anbernic's devices are primarily Linux, which are the closest to working out of the box. You only need to worry about adding games. With Android, you have to do first-time setups, which is installing a bunch of emulator apps. Then you'll have to go into each one and configure them individually. Then download Daigisho if you don't like the front end that you start with, and a front end is like basically a home menu where all your games live. Think of it like if you have a home console like an Xbox or something like that, it's like the launcher menu. You pick the game and it launches it and it picks the correct emulator for you, but you'll have to set the correct emulators in the first place. I would only recommend Android for a power user, someone who's fine with configuring settings and fine-tuning each game. Windows is going to offer a similar experience, but you could download a front end like Retrobat, and that's easier to set up than Android in my opinion, but Windows of course will have its own quirks, but you might be more familiar with Windows. With Linux, it kind of just works. Which operating system do you want? Continuing with operating system talk, you're going to want to think about which OS is the most important to you. As you get into the much more expensive devices like the $500 area, it becomes more likely that the device will be Windows-based or SteamOS-based. In $130 to $250 range, you'll mostly see Android. Below that, it's likely Linux. If you want a lot of freedom, then Android and Windows will probably be the best for you, but you're going to need to be a little more techy than just knowing how to use File Explorer. Android, in my experience, is an absolute pain in the fuzzy butt cheeks, but I've been using Windows my whole life, so that might just be personal bias. Don't count Linux out though. It can do things that Android struggles with, like running Pico 8 natively. That either excited you or just gave you questions. Check out Pico 8 stuff when you get a chance if you've never heard of it. It's basically a dev kit that people use to make modern retro games because it's designed with specific limitations. By running natively, I mean that it's not emulating it, which means it runs perfectly. Also, you can add Splore, which is like its storefront that lets you search up games and get recommendations. The games are all free for the most part, so yeah, just check out Pico 8 if you get the chance. It might not be something that you search for a device for specifically, but it's a nice little bonus. If you use Android or Windows, you can use the device itself to download ROMs using its browser, so that could be a time saver for you. But for Linux, you need a device that can read an SD card or transfer data over a USB-C cable. There are other factors too. While Android and Windows means a lot of functionality, it also means a lot of opportunities for distraction. A big reason why I dropped my RP3 was because of the distractions. I couldn't stop checking my socials. Controls. The games you plan to play are going to need controls that work well for them. For example, my RGCube XX doesn't have triggers, but none of the games I'd play would use triggers anyway. It has small analog sticks, which is fine because PS1 doesn't even use analog sticks all that much besides a few specific games. It's more of a nice bonus. No touchscreen, that's fine. I'm not playing DS games that use touch that much. The D-pad is at the top because you're primarily playing older games. That's the big thing I worry about. If the analog stick is up top, I'm not interested. On an Xbox, it's fine because of the games you're playing. But if you're using a D-pad a lot, you want it at the top of the handheld because it's uncomfortable to bend your thumb downwards on handhelds. It's also going to mess up your grip. This can also just be preference. Consider your D-pad preferences too. Do you like the disc? I don't. I still got the RGCube XX and it changed my mind, honestly. There's also the Plus, PlayStation segmented, and the Switch D-pad that's not really a D-pad. Another thing you might not think to consider is the location of the volume buttons. You'd just assume that they'd be in a place that you couldn't accidentally hit. But on the RP3 Plus, some serial killer decided that they wanted to cause as much pain as possible and put the volume buttons where your left hand rests and the home button where your right hand rests, so you're pressing those by accident all the time. You might also want to consider the button sizes and how they feel. The RP3 Plus has triggers, but they're shallow and a little awkward. They're also tiny. The RGCube XX shoulder buttons are a little hard to press. They can be a bit stiff, but all of the other buttons feel perfectly fine. Stick size is also important. If the sticks are too short, you'll have a more difficult time with controls. I don't want to explain the science and math behind it, but basically short sticks means you'll want to play on a lower sensitivity for it to feel comfortable, whereas taller sticks means higher sensitivities feel more manageable. The head of the thumbstick might also benefit from being wider. Do you care about aesthetics? Every device is going to look radically different from the last, so do you care if the device looks cheap? Like if you pulled the handheld out in front of someone, would you feel weird about it or embarrassed? If so, consider something like Anbernic, as most of their devices look like existing handhelds. I got some weird looks when I was using the Retro Pocket 3, but people are always surprised and interested when I bring out the Nano. The RGCube XX looks like a gaming system, but just a bit off enough that I'll get questions. But if you buy one of the SP or GBA theme systems from Anbernic, they look like a normal Game Boy, so just expect questions like, is that a Game Boy? There's more to aesthetics than the shape too, like check out Etsy for skins, grips, different color buttons, stick extenders, and thumb caps. Anbernic devices are very popular, especially their GBA lookalike, so keep that in mind if you want to get fancy. Consider whether it'll have space for a stick or two, or whether you might want a USB plug charm. Stock experience or CFW. CFW means custom firmware. Basically, stock OS is the interface and setup that comes from the maker. If you're using an Anbernic device, the stock OS is pretty decent now after quite a few updates. But there are other choices like Mu, Nully, Rocknix, MinUI. Once you decide on the device, you should check out its OS options. Android and Windows, of course, won't have these choices. Stock is probably fine for most people, but if you want Portmaster, you're going to need something like Mu. Portmaster is an app that lets you bring certain PC games over to your handheld. Like, you might want to be able to play Stardew, and with Portmaster, you can run it from your handheld directly. You could always use Moonlight, which lets you stream your PC to your handheld, but Portmaster ports will run better. This goes back to the out-of-the-box readiness question and what you want to play. If you want Portmaster, you'll need Mu or something similar, and that can be a pain if you don't know what you're doing. Each CFW is going to have its own appearance and benefits, but it's more of a problem for you to worry about after you have your handheld. Ergonomics. How important is it that the handheld has grip, texture, treads, and is shapely? Are you fine with holding something that feels essentially like an iPad with controls, or do you need a handheld with a bit of booty? I'm 100% in my comfy arc with handhelds right now. I'll use a less powerful system if it means I get to feel comfy while holding it. I love my Switch too, but laying in bed with it above my head, it's not heavy, but with the lack of grip, it's not comfy either. Ergonomics is like half of the reason why I picked up the Cube XX. Like, it could be the most powerful device in the world, but if it's uncomfortable, I'm going to make excuses not to play it, and size can also play into comfort. It doesn't need to be portable. You might think, it's a handheld, wouldn't it be portable just by the merits of being a handheld? Well, that depends on your definition of portable. I used to consider portable as meaning being able to fit in your pocket, because just until the past few years, handhelds never really got as big as they are now, outside of the Game Gear and the Nomad, but those were extremes, outliers. But I didn't consider those portable either. But new days means words change. So for me, it's portable if it doesn't need to be plugged in to function and can fit in a bag. but there's levels within portability. I carry a backpack everywhere I go, so I could fit like 2 to 3 Steam Decks. That doesn't mean I think of the Steam Deck as being portable, so it's probably not the best definition. You could say it needs to fit in a pocket or a handbag, but there's a big range of sizes there too, like from skinny jean size, where the RG28XX would fit well, to cargo shorts, where you could probably still get away with a Steam Deck. But you know what portable means to you. Keep in mind more than just the thickness of the device. A Retroid is thin, but they're longer than your phone, but also keep in mind that there is such thing as too small and too big. The RG Nano is an extreme example, but it's so small that it can be played with just one hand. But its screen is so small that anything you play on it is going to require some squinting. Your first device should be something you'll use a lot, your main device. When I got the Nano, I got it thinking that because of its size that I'd be playing games more, because I could just bring it with me anywhere. But the small size and screen is so uncomfortable that I thought it was more annoying than it was fun. The same thing can be true about large devices. If it's so big that it's a pain to deal with, you may choose to play nothing at all. Think about where you'll be playing too. If it's outside, then you probably don't want much bigger than a PS Vita. You also probably don't want a super expensive handheld with you outside, so someone doesn't just, run past and yoink it. Like, not everyone knows what a Steam Deck is, but the people who know what a Steam Deck is know it's super expensive. If you're using it in bed, you don't want anything too heavy, or you'll die when you fall asleep while holding it and it smacks you in the face. If you're playing it in the living room while your partner watches TV, then bigger is probably fine. But personally, I think the Nano sucks and doesn't really have an ideal time and space. If you want small and still comfortable, then the GBA and GBA SP style devices from Anbernic are good. Miu are also good, but they can be hard to find sometimes. They're pretty popular. Price. The price is going to be heavily affected by your target games, so this can entirely be out of your hands. For example, even on a sale, you're not going to find a device that can play PS2 and GameCube for less than $100. Unfortunately, the tech's just not there yet. Make sure you're not overpaying either. There are devices out there that are designed to specialize in one system, but are way more powerful than they need to be. Don't pay for power you won't use. No point in spending $200 to play GBA when there are 50 different GBA-capable devices for $60 or less. Like, if you're only going to play Game Boy, don't buy a Steam Deck. But I feel like that's pretty obvious. Minor stuff. We talked about the important stuff, the rest of it is minor stuff, little bonuses that you're like, oh neat, and not necessarily stuff you might be looking for. For the most part, all of your devices will have Wi-Fi, and if you want to use Retro Achievements or Pico 8 Explore function, you'll need it. But Anbernic's devices can use Wi-Fi to play games, multiplayer, with other Anbernic devices, which is cool. Makes me wish I had people to play Pokemon with or something. It'd be like when we were Larva, just trading Pokemon in the schoolyard. Most devices also have Bluetooth, so wireless controllers and headphones will work, but 2.4 GHz controllers have less support. If you prefer wired, make sure the device has a headphone jack. Some devices have mini HDMI or micro HDMI ports, so you can even consoleize them. That means just plugging them into your TV, and then you can use a wireless controller to sit back at your, chair or whatever to play games. But that's pretty much it. If you're someone who buys handhelds regularly too, please let me know if I missed anything by leaving a comment. This is just my selection process now. It sucks, but no matter how thorough you are, you can't predict how a system will feel or be once it's in your hands. Also, despite there being as many handheld options as there are people on this planet now, you still might never find your perfect handheld. So you might need to settle with the one that checks the most boxes for you. For me, that was the RG Cube XX, but if you want power, a widescreen, or a different D-pad, then you might be better off with something else. Honestly, you either hate 1:1 screens or you love them. Thanks for watching. Bye!